Welcome everyone to this Action for Happiness event on the theme of mental fitness with Shirzad Chamine. And Shirzad, it's lovely to have you with us. Thank you for making time for this.
My pleasure.
Very warm welcome. And a very warm welcome to all of you joining us from all around the world. I can see on my screen we already have around 3,000 people live on this event. So it's great that you can all be here from all the corners of the world. Lovely to see you welcoming each other on the chat and the great community spirit we always have on these Action for Happiness events. But please do try to respect each other on the chat, as we always do. And obviously we're here to listen and learn from Shirzad. So looking forward to seeing responses to what's being said. But let's also try not to distract each other too much with the chat at the same time. So we're going to have a conversation on this evening's theme, mental fitness, and so many things that feel incredibly urgent and important and timely, I guess, right now. And really looking forward to that. We're going to be doing a few interactive things during the event and so much wisdom that Shirzad has to offer for us. And we're also going to be making time for your questions as well. So please, if you do have a question for Shirzad or a response to what's being said, use the Q&A function. We won't have time for all of them, but we'll make sure we come to at least some of your great questions. So let's dive straight in. Shirzad, thank you again for being here. And this theme of mental fitness, we spend so much time on our physical fitness, but it feels to me that we maybe don't spend enough time on our mental fitness. Why do you feel this is so important right now?
Well, Mark, it starts with the definition of mental fitness. So mental fitness, we define it as your capacity to handle life's great challenges with a positive mindset rather than getting all stressed and upset and going negative. So if there's no better time in figuring out how do I handle life's great challenges in a mind that stays positive and hopeful and feels empathy and all those wonderful feelings rather than upset, stressed, those things. And we believe that depends on not just insight in your mind, but literally muscles in the brain. That's why we call it mental fitness. The bigger the challenges are, the higher mental fitness you need so that you're able to handle it without going negative.
Very important. And there are so many dimensions to this, but one that feels very present for me right now is that many of us, I think, feel overwhelmed in some ways with what's going on in the world and in our own lives for a variety of reasons. I know that some people are feeling hopeless and a bit anxious right now about the state of the world, not just the state of their own lives. How is this relevant in these difficult times? Is it possible to use some of the techniques that you might take us through this evening, even in some of those challenging situations?
Absolutely, this is what it's made for, right? So let me describe what there are three core muscles that constitute your mental fitness. And as I describe those muscles, then you see how immediately relevant they are. So the first is the ability to intercept what we call your saboteurs, the agents of self-sabotage inside your mind, the ones in your head that handle life's challenges with negativity. There are, in our research, we have done research with about 500,000 people. There are 10 ways we go negative, 10 types of saboteurs in our head. They have familiar names like the judge, the controller, the victim, the stickler, the avoider, the pleaser. Does it sound familiar? These are ways that we handle stress and life challenges. So number one muscle of mental fitness is the ability to intercept these characters in your head and say, no, I'm going to stop you. This is not how I'm going to handle this challenge because it's going to take me negative. So intercepting the saboteurs. Then then the second muscle comes in, which is the ability, we call it the self-command muscle, the ability to actually command your mind to quiet the region of the brain where all these negative forces live and activate the region of the brain where the counterpart to your saboteurs live. We call that counterpart your sage. So if you're a Star Wars fan, we are really talking about inside your mind, there's a war raging between your inner Darth Vaders, the forces of the dark side, and your inner Jedi, the positive one in you, your true self. We call that your sage. So that second muscle I talked about is what we call self-command, the ability to command your mind and literally shift brain activation from the negative part of your brain, activate the positive part where your sage lives, which brings up the third muscle, which is literally the muscles of the inner Jedi, the sage, so that you can respond to life's challenges with 5 superpowers or that live in the positive part of your brain. One or more of those superpowers is all you need to be able to handle any challenge with positivity. So it's a very simple technique. It's all based on neuroscience and factor analysis research, and it absolutely could come in handy in handling the challenges of today.
Well, I'm already seeing a lot of love for the Star Wars analogy on the chat. And as a Star Wars fan myself,
wonderful.
I find that very motivating. I'd love to come to each of those different bits in turn, really, the saboteurs, and then this idea of a sage and some of these Jedi powers that we'd all love to cultivate. But on the saboteurs, we've shared with the audience before the event a tool I know you provide to help people work out what their saboteurs are. So I've actually done that myself, and I'm happy to share that on screen to give people a taste of what my saboteurs are, just so they can see that in action. And if anyone hasn't seen that yet, we can send that in the follow-up link. But I guess before looking at specific saboteurs, where do these things come from? Why do we have sort of some of these sort of negative thought patterns in our brains? Presumably some of them have what you might think of as beneficial reasons for being there, to protect us, to remind us. What's going on there? Why have we formed those inner narratives, do you think?
Yeah, well, absolutely. They are all about survival, of helping us survive as a kid, physically and emotionally. And so the one saboteur that absolutely everybody has, and we can be sure that you have a version of that, is the judge saboteur. So what is the judge? The judge is the one that's constantly focusing on what's wrong and constantly being paranoid about all the worst possible cases of things happening. Is the one that wakes you up at 3 in the morning and beats you up and says, you idiot, what's wrong with you? Why did you make that stupid mistake yesterday? Or I tell you, you're gonna fail tomorrow. Who the hell do you think you are to think you succeed? It's the one who always finds the negative. Why is that helpful for evolutionary survival? Because for our ancestors, the ones in the jungle who were paranoid, who always assumed the worst. When the tree was shaking and you weren't quite sure what's behind the tree emerging, if you always assumed it's a tiger coming to eat me alive and were paranoid and ran, you survived. But if you were positive and optimistic and said, I have a good feeling today, I think it's a koala bear coming out to give me a bear hug, how long do you think that ancestor lasted, right? So that predisposition to the negative became the judge saboteur that we all have. Now, the other 9, the controller, avoider, stickler, victim, all of those things, they have a little bit of a different story. They take your greatest natural strength, and by overusing and abusing it, they turn it into your greatest weakness. That's how you go negative. So if I look at your saboteur, I can tell you what your great natural strength is that by taking it too far has become your greatest weakness.
So let's do that. Let's make this real. I'm happy to bear all to the audience. I'm just going to share my screen. So this is I think the summary of your saboteur assessment. Are you seeing that on screen now, Shirzad?
Yes.
Yeah. So I can see there that I'm particularly a stickler and a pleaser, have those saboteurs. Do you want to say a bit more about what that means?
Yeah, so when I see that you have the sticker saboteur, what I know is one of the great strengths that you have, that you were born with, was a predisposition to pay attention to detail and be able to bring organization to things and look at ambiguous or chaotic things and bring order and organization to it. That's an awesome strength. And you started overusing it. You went to it too much and too far, so that it becomes a stickler saboteur, meaning that you try to make everything perfect. And by trying to make everything perfect, you're constantly anxious because things are never perfect enough. And you waste so much time trying to make everything perfect that the few things that do need to be perfect suffer because you're spreading yourself too thin. You're never happy with things with yourself or others around you because you're constantly finding how it could be better.
That really rings true.
Yeah.
I can hear myself in that a lot. I'm also seeing on the chat, people are saying, for example, Mark, your color-coded bookshelf behind you there, which I would love to take credit for, but actually my daughter did, so I can't take any credit for that. What about the pleaser, though? I sometimes refer to myself as a sort of recovering people pleaser, having spent what feels like most of my life trying to impress others and gradually realizing that was a route to unhappiness. What does that mean?
So that one I share with you, one of my greatest strengths and probably one of your greatest strengths is you're naturally very loving and giving and empathic. That's a wonderful strength to have. And like in my own case, I am using that strength, my sage, my true self is using that strength as a way of making me really good at the work that I do. However, when I overuse that strength and I've used that strength, that's when I become a pleaser, where I'm a father to this beautiful daughter, and my pleaser can't set boundaries, can't say no to her. I don't want to hurt her feelings. I don't want to disappoint her. So in that, I become a father who is not as compelling. And I have even shared that with my daughter. I said, hey, you know what? I have a pleaser saboteur. That's when I'm not such a good father with you, because I'm not setting boundaries. So she and I kind of know about that and have promised to not take advantage of it too far.
Yeah, that's a nice. And I know in myself that it took me a long time to learn how to say no to requests in a way that felt in line with my values. So instead of always saying yes to things I couldn't really do, to be able to say, actually, I love what you're doing. Thanks for asking. Unfortunately, I haven't got time for that right now, but good luck with it. And that kind of that way of still being loving and compassionate and caring, but also keeping a sense of boundaries is one coping mechanism. So I'd love to come in a moment onto the sage aspect of this, but what do we do to respond to these saboteurs once we've tuned into them? What you mentioned, some of these kind of
well, each of these saboteurs has its own specific, strategy. For example, for the stickler, I would have you create, two buckets, a bucket of 20% and 80%. I would have you look at all the things you're trying to make perfect and realize that only 20% of those really do need to be perfect. Put them in the 20% bucket and put the other 80% you worry so much about into the 80% bucket, where good enough is good enough. And breathe into, the thing is in that bucket, good enough is good enough, so that you free up time for the other 20%. That's an example. With the pleaser, I have you really choose to say yes, and know that when you say no to people, it's actually a gift of trust and boundary and relationship with them. It strengthens your relationship with them, doesn't weaken it. The pleaser actually erodes relationship trust, because people don't quite know when you're telling them the difficult truths and stuff like that. So I will have you look at no as a gift you're giving yourself and others. And so look at like that strategy. For each saboteur, there is a strategy. But in particular, the thing that we want you to do is, as you become aware of these patterns that you have, we want to just be observing yourself and your thoughts. And the moment your thoughts and emotion seem to be driven by that saboteur, we want you to just label that moment instantly as a saboteur moment and say, you know what? I'm about to get hijacked by my controller, by my judge, by my pleaser. Stop. I'm not going to trust my mind telling me to do that. And I'm going to shift my brain activation. And so how do you shift your brain activation? We have you do the second step, the second muscle I shared with you, which is the self-command muscle. Commanding your mind to shift brain activation, quiet the saboteurs, begin to activate the sage. And how do you do that? We do these with these 10-second exercises. We call them a PQ rep. A PQ rep stands for positive intelligence. PQ stands for positive intelligence quotient. The way we describe your mental fitness, we measure your mental fitness as your PQ. So a PQ rep is like a dumbbell rep that instead of building up your bicep muscle, it builds up your self-command muscle. So you are in command of your mind and shifts brain activation. If you don't mind, I want to practice some of that with you.
Please, that sounds great.
All right,
let's do it.
Awesome. So these are just 10 seconds, 10 seconds at a time, and just like a one rep. So one that's most popular with the people who teach this stuff to is if you take two fingertips and gently rub two fingertips against each other with such exquisite attention that you can feel the fingertip ridges on both fingers. So gently rub two fingertips against each other with such attention that you can feel the fingertip ridges with both fingers. And if you wish, you can close your eyes and do that for greater attention. But as you do that, and this was a little more than one rep that we just did. If we had your head under fMRI, we would have noticed that by just this 10-second one rep, you ever so slightly quieted the regions of your brain where your saboteurs live and activate the region where your sage lives with all of its brilliance and wisdom. Let's try one other one. There's literally 100 ways to do this, but let's try another one. And for this one, close your eyes and bring your attention to your toes and try to find as many of your toes as you can. And you may need to wiggle your toes a little bit and try to find as many of your toes as you can. Many people can't quite find all of their toes. Don't worry if you can't find all of your toes, but pay exquisite attention to where they are, and if you can find them, wiggle them if you need to sense them. So, so that's another PQ wrap. And of course, you can do them with your eyes open. And the beauty of this, and so for those who are in meditation mindfulness, you probably see an overlap. The overlap is that with all of our work, we go to the foundational building block of things. So what I just shared with you is a foundational building block of which meditation and mindfulness are a special form. So if you're doing meditation, just noticing your breath, noticing your breath, noticing your breath, that's like one, the PQ wrap is paying attention to the breath.
Mm. Can
Or
I
the
just check
sounds of
one
other.
thing you said,
Yeah,
Shirzad, which is,
yeah.
I want to make sure I've understood this correctly. So it's
Yeah.
when we get that sort of negative emotional experience, we're not in any way trying to step away from it. We're in many ways leaning into recognizing it, to see it for what it is, and then thinking, now I'm going to sort of consciously choose to do something to change the brain activation. So it's not about pushing away those experiences. It's more about finding a way to sort of embrace them in a way.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, what the mistake most people make is they start thinking about what's happening with this emotion. Why am I feeling it like that? Thinking that that's the way to arrive at the wisdom of what's going on with you. The problem is you're activating the hard thinking mind, which is not where the wisdom of your sage lives. So paradoxically, by going to the no thinking mind, by activating the region of your brain where your sage lives, you're activating the region of the brain that has far greater wisdom, that actually is more energy aware and more emotion aware, activating the part of the brain that will have the insight of, oh my goodness, this is what's happening right now. So we are not, we are seeking the wisdom of what's happening, but not doing it by thinking about it a lot.
Mm. Well, I'd love to come on to the sage aspect because I'm intrigued by the superpowers that you referred to. So we've maybe found ways of dealing more sort of constructively with the difficult negative emotions. We've tuned into perhaps these saboteur habits we have, some more strongly than others. So I'm sure people will be keen to sort of do their own saboteur reports after this. But what about the sage? How do we cultivate more of that sort of wise response?
So once you have done your PQ wraps to activate the region of your brain where your sage lives, you now have access to 5 sage superpowers that I'll tell you about later. But most importantly, you now have access to the sage perspective. In my book, there's an entire book on the sage perspective. And what the sage perspective is that whatever the situation and circumstances, I can convert it into a gift and opportunity. That all situations and circumstances can be converted into gifts and opportunity. So the moment I shift to sage, the gateway to it is the belief that I can convert whatever is upsetting me, whatever is stressing me, whatever feels problematic, I can convert it into gift and opportunity, which begins the curiosity about, now, how do I convert it into a gift? Which begins a cascading set of emotions and actions that become self-fulfilling, that actually generates the gift. And there's a story I'd love to tell you that kind of brings that to life if you have a second.
So, please do, yeah.
It actually comes from Taoist China. It's one of my favorite stories, pretty popular in China. So it's about this farmer who lives on a farm, sage old farmer, and he has this stallion that he loves against all other possessions. And one day he enters his stallion in a nearby village competition, and his stallion wins first prize. His neighbors bring their congratulations. We are so excited your stallion won first prize. And the farmer says, who knows what is good and what is bad? Which is a very strange response. The neighbors are puzzled. They go away. A week or so passes. The thieves in the area have discovered this stallion is more expensive, more precious. He has won first prize. So they come and steal the stallion. The neighbors bring their condolences. And once again, the farmer says, who knows what is good and what is bad? Again, very strange response. They're puzzled. They go away. A week or so passes. This stallion is a very free-spirited stallion. He breaks away from his captors, finds his way back to the farmer's farm. Along the way, he befriends all these precious wild mares. So he enters the farmer's farm himself and all these precious wild mares. The neighbors bring their congratulations. And once again, the farmer says, who knows what is good and what is bad? And again, the neighbors are puzzled. This guy is weird. He's getting old. They go away. A week or so passes. The farmer has a young adult son who is riding one of these wild mares, trying to tame her, and he's thrown to the ground and he breaks his leg. The neighbors bring their condolences. And once again, the farmer says, who knows what is good and what is bad? By now, the neighbors are certain this guy's getting too old. We got to go get some help for him. These are crazy answers to life situations. They go away. Another week or so passes. By the way, you know this is a very eventful kind of a village. Like in this village, lots of things happen every week. It's a very exciting place. So a week or so has passed. A war breaks out in the imperial region. The military comes from village to village, conscripting able-bodied young adults to go to war as soldiers. They have to bypass the farmer's son because he has a broken leg. By this time, the story, the neighbors don't even bother coming and bringing their congratulations because they know what the farmer is going to say. Everybody, please say it with me so you can remember it. What is the farmer going to say? Who knows what is good and what is bad? There's a profound wisdom in this ancient Taoist Chinese story. There's one thing about it that's different from the way we teach this work. So in this story, the farmer just has passive spiritual faith. He believes the bad thing will convert into a good thing and so by itself, right? But the way we teach it, because I coach a lot of CEOs and half of them are very spiritual. Usually the spiritually oriented ones, they say, you know what? This sage perspective is something my spiritual tradition teaches. It says, hey, everything happens for a reason. Don't question it. See the wisdom in it. See the gift of it. And then I say, okay, great. So just double down on this as a way of you living your spiritual faith. But the other half of my CEO clients are, atheist or agnostic. And with them, what I say is, you know what? If you believe the saboteur perspective that says, this is bad, 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 we are screwed, this is terrible, why did this happen? You're starting a cascade of emotion and energy with yourself and others that will make a bad thing worse and waste a ton of mental, emotional energy. But if you say, I shall and I will convert this into a gift and opportunity, you start a cascading series of positive emotions and actions that will make it so. So the sage perspective is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And any given day, you're coming across a ton of things that are happening that your judge is coming in and judging as bad, bad, bad. And the question is, what's the alternative? And the challenges you have right now, what are you upset about? What are you waiting to be different? What are you're so tired and can't wait to be over? What would it be like if you ask yourself, what's the gift of this? And what action do I take to convert this into a gift for myself, for my loved ones, for the world? And only after you start asking that question and over again, do you begin to access the wisdom and the powers of the sage to make it so.
So it's so powerful. And it brings to mind a number of examples of challenges which might not feel anything like opportunities, actually might feel the opposite. And so maybe in a moment, I'd love to come back and say, well, how might we convert some of those really quite difficult moments into that sense of opportunity? But you mentioned earlier that there's these sort of 5 modalities or superpowers that we can use to sort of bring out the sage. Maybe now's a good time to hear a bit more about those to bring this to life a bit, because obviously I think I'm seeing on the chat that lots of people say, I'd love to be my inner sage, I'd love to be more like a sage. How do we cultivate this, Shirzad?
Yeah, so the inner Jedi, right? The inner sage,
I want
the
to be
one
an
that
inner
we
Jedi,
call your true self. So all of our work is based on factor analysis to go to the root building blocks and the fewest number of components that you need to concern yourself with. So the power of factor analysis, it comes up with just the core building blocks. And what we found is that there are only 5 positive factors. Just like if you do factor analysis on colors, you find out there are only 3 primary colors with which you can paint any canvas. what we have found with the sage, the positive side of you only needs to have 5 superpowers, which everybody has access to if you activate that region of your brain. And what they are is empathize, which is all about deep love, compassion, forgiveness, gratitude, that family of emotions and state. Explore, which is about, discovery, a beginner's mind type of approach to things. Innovate, which is pretty obvious. It's about invention, thinking out of the box. Navigate, which is being guided by a compass of inner purpose and meaning, being guided by deeper sense of what brings meaning and purpose to life. And activate, which is about fierce, fearless, laser focused action. So when you think about it, any challenge you bring can be handled brilliantly with one or more combination of these. And like the Jedi in war, when she's being attacked by lots of different enemies, lots of different directions, that she wakes up to, yeah, I'm all of a sudden stressed out. Oh my God, I'm under attack. What do I need to do? First thing she does is make sure she just activates the region of the brain, the sage, so that's not stressed or upset or any of that stuff. And the power that's needed in that moment is activate, which is how do you be fearless, calm, clear-headed, laser-focused in action, which makes you a fierce warrior handling any challenge in the world. And of course, all of the 4 other powers can come in handy in other situations.
Thank you. Could you just say the 5 again? Because someone has asked you to practice. Empathize, explore, innovate,
navigate, and activate.
Yeah.
And there's typically, it kind of goes in that order a little bit. Activate is usually what you want to do last, after you have really seen is empathy needed in the situation for yourself or others. Do you really understand what's going on to explore? Have you thought about the best possible solutions to innovate? Navigate, is it aligned with what brings deeper meaning and purpose with that inner compass? Before activate. Now, in a lot of situations, you don't need all of these 5. If the house is on fire, you just want to go to activate. You don't want to do any of that other stuff. But more complex situations, the more than one of the superpowers comes in.
Well, it feels to me that one skill that we could all do a lot with, what we all need a lot more in the world right now, is that skill of empathy. It feels to me there's a lot of people who are arguing with each other without that ability to put themselves in each other's shoes to really hear what another might be saying. What kind of techniques could you show us to help cultivate a bit more that sort of empathize aspect of the sage? How do we do that in practice?
Yeah, Mark, I find that with the people I work with who are a lot of high achievers, empathize is the weakest link. And so typically I look them in the eye and I say, you know what, our job number 1 is to shift you from the self-brutality of the judge to deep unconditional love of the sage. I want you to fall in love with yourself, and I want you to quit being so brutal on yourself, because most high achievers are brutalizing yourself, with the judge constantly beating the crap out of them, saying you're not good enough, you haven't done enough, what's wrong with you, aren't you better, all that stuff. They wear that as like a badge of honor, like that's the way to improve yourself. And no, the problem is that these saboteurs, like the judge, have convinced you that you need them in order to improve and get better and to achieve. And that is, I call that self-brutality, because you're constantly draining yourself of positive energy, and you're prolonging your periods of being down and upset and start the cascade of negativity. So therefore, that empathize power, which is the antidote to brutality of the self-judge, is the most important work we do amongst all the other stuff we do. And there, empathize, we clearly look at it's empathy towards myself and empathy towards others. And we use the metaphor of putting the oxygen mask on yourself first. It is not selfish to start there. And as a matter of fact, I want everybody on this call to start there. I want you to fall back in love with yourself. That's your job number 1. That's the best way that you are going to give to the world, to your loved ones, and to the world that needs you, is to fall in love with yourself. Energize yourself, put that oxygen mask on yourself, and stop the self-brutalization. And one technique that we use is, you need to remember who you are. to get in touch with empathy. To fall in love with yourself, you need to remember who you are. This work is not about changing you. It's about helping you remember who you are. And one really helpful way to remember who you are is go find the childhood picture. Your essence, your sage, your true self is as unique as your fingerprint. We all are born with unique, gorgeous, beautiful essence. And somewhere in your childhood, before 13 years old, typically there most of us have a picture or two where that true, incredible, beautiful self is shining through. I want you to go find that picture, and I want you to keep looking at that picture every day and keep looking at that being and fall in love with that being. And your job, number one, is to protect that incredible being that you are from the brutality of your judge.
That's nice, that visualizing the child. And I guess we can do that also when we want to empathize with others as well. We can look for the child within them when we see their hostile behavior and try and understand what's behind their behavior as well as what's behind our own behavior.
Exactly. And so the reason I started with the first one is that if you're not able to see the beauty in yourself, you're not quite able to see the beauty in others quite as much either. So I looked at my childhood picture for weeks, every single day, until I remember this beautiful being that I am, and fell in love with myself. And I adore myself. By the way, I adore myself, right? I started my Stanford TED Talk by saying I'm absolutely, incredibly, and totally awesome. And that's because I love myself, and it's not arrogant. I want you to be able to stand up in front of anybody and say, I'm absolutely, incredibly, and totally awesome because my sage is gorgeous. I want you to be that clear about how gorgeous your sage is. And oh, by the way, I have some really dark saboteurs. My judge is so ugly, I call him the executioner. So I am a mixed bag of extraordinarily beautiful sage and some really ugly saboteurs. And I have them on notice, and I am vigilant about them, right? So I want you to see the mixed bag that you are, fall in love with the beauty of your essence, true self, your sage, and be vigilant about your dark side, about your saboteurs. Now, having done that, then going back to empathy towards others, if somebody in your life is irritating you and all you can feel is your spine get stiffened, and when you see their irritating behavior, what's happening is that you're seeing and interacting with their saboteur. Everybody's saboteur is off-putting. So what you have gotten into the habit of is you're just seeing their saboteur and reacting to their saboteur. Their saboteur is contagious. It's kind of activating your judge, right? So to bypass that, one of the techniques is activate empathy towards them. And one of the ways you do that is we call that visualize the child. So just like visualizing yourself as the child helps you see the beauty of your sage self, you can do that towards others. So somebody in your life who's a little irritating to you, you have conflict with, next time you're with them, just as you're looking at them, try to picture what they might have been look like as a 5-year-old. What was their eyes like, their hair, their facial expression? What were the qualities of their essence, true self? I guarantee you, when you look at somebody, if you really look like that, with that intention, I mean, right now, look at me or look at Mark and begin to imagine what we must have looked like as a 5-year-old. What was my eyes like? How do you think my eyes look like? Or hair? I did have hair as a 5-year-old, right? And as you do that, there's no way you won't begin to feel warmth because you're seeing that person's essence self. And you see yourself shift enough to allow them for the sage to come out, because by reacting to their saboteur, you're just bringing out more of their saboteurs.
That's so powerful. And I really love what you said about being able to embrace the sort of beauty within, but also with an awareness of the darkness and holding those two together in a sort of really authentic way. It's difficult, but I think it's a more real and engaging way to live, and to see in others as well that we all have these challenging thought patterns and also the beauty within. And if we can help cultivate that in ourselves and each other, everything goes better.
And one of the things, Mark, that the judge loves to do is feeling superior or inferior. And what we are saying here is, start with yourself. Acknowledge the fact that you're a mixed bag of gorgeous, lovable sage and off-putting saboteurs. And then as you do that, it also allows you to see every other human being as that and have compassion for the fact that this person too, just like you, is a mixed bag, extraordinarily beautiful sage. And off-putting saboteurs, now you do need to protect yourself against their saboteurs. So there are strategies about how do I make sure this person's saboteur doesn't hurt me, cause harm, whatever. But you're also able to not just, you know, feel polarized and just see them as their saboteurs. And in that sense, I think that's one of the solutions for our more polarized world these days, because we are demonizing each other. And if we really look hard enough, we're gonna see this function in every human being out there, you know, to varying extent, like somebody's saboteur more dominant than others, but there's still a sage there. And can you see that? And can you have compassion for that person? Because they're just like us, they're having a human experience.
Not wanting to take the Star Wars analogy too far, but when Luke looks at Vader, he sees the good in him despite all of the darkness, is what just came to mind for me. Anyway, I digress. We haven't got time to dive into all 5 of those sage areas, but another one you mentioned, I think, in connection with navigate, this idea of finding meaning and exploring what really matters and so on. I think, again, with all of these, you have a little exercise we could potentially try out on this one. What would you suggest?
Yeah, with each of the 5 powers, we have what we call power games. Like power game for empathize was visualize the child. That gives you access to empathize. The power game for navigate is flash forward, which is you visit yourself at the end of your life looking back. So, so let's do that right now, for example. So let's close our eyes. And I want you to bring to mind, just briefly to work on it, a particular conflict that you're having, tension in a relationship or conflict that you have, that you're trying to resolve. So just keep in mind what that conflict is you want to work on and improve. And one way that I would like to shed some light on this conflict for you is, let's visit you at the end of your life looking back. So imagine yourself visiting yourself at the end of your life, healthy of mind and body. You're healthy of mind and body, but it's at the end of your life. You're celebrating this great life that you've lived. Imagine yourself as that being, healthy of mind and body, end of your life, and visit that being. We call this your wiser, elder self. And ask your wiser, older self, in this conflict, in this tension I'm experiencing, what's really important for me to pay attention to? What is important for me to pay attention to? What truly matters? What still truly matters when you look at the situation at the end of your life, looking back? And as we do that, we realize that 90% of things we pay attention to and worry about become ridiculously unimportant at the end of our life looking back. And only what is essential, what's meaningful, what's purposeful stays. And that allows us to focus on that in meeting our challenges, handling conflict or other challenges. Great. I hope that generated some insight. If it didn't, I usually spend 15 minutes on that exercise, not 2, but you can do that in your own time. And I often use that technique. Any major business challenges that I have, I ask myself at the end of my life, looking back, what would still seem significant? And again, 90% of the stuff disappears instantly from consideration.
I found that very much. That's very powerful and moving exercise. I found that end of life perspective makes me say things like spend more time with the people you love, doing the things you're really passionate about, and let go of so much of the day-to-day worry. And I suspect that's a fairly universal clarity that comes with it. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, Shirzad, and we've got all kinds of great questions coming in. And there's one thing that's been on my mind as you've been talking that has also come up, and I've just lost the question for 1 second. If I can't find it again, I'll paraphrase it myself. But yes, it's from Richard here. And what was on my mind when you said about this idea, the sort of the universal sage idea that we can turn any difficult situation into an opportunity, if we can see it that way. What was on my mind was, but some people are facing some really quite bleak situations. So coming to Richard's question, can all situations be converted to gifts or opportunities? Perhaps I just have a depressive outlook on life, but it seems some situations can't have some sort of gift or good opportunity. Death of a loved one seems to be hard to turn into a gift or opportunity. Or being an assault victim. Yeah. So they were having a terminal illness. These really difficult, severe life traumas, but indeed things that we all face. How does grieving, how do these things fit into this model, Shirzad?
Yeah, I have a couple of answers on that. One is, every universal law reaches a limit. For example, even the Newtonian physics, which describes 99% of what's happening in the universe, it actually breaks down when you get to speed of light level, so that in that extreme, you got to shift to Einstein and relativity and quantum physics. So one way to look at it is this applies to 99% of what's happening in your life, and let's not take it to the extreme of death, because that's the limiting factor, in which case other systems might come in. For example, faith. For example, do you have a spiritual belief system or whatever? That's one way to talk about it. The other is it takes black belt level to actually have things of that nature still create something positive in the world. I talk about it in the book, the story of a mother whose teenage daughter was killed by a drunk driver. And a few days later, I forget exactly when, she stood in front of the press and she said, "I will not cease until I convert the tragedy of my daughter's death into something positive for the world." She started Mothers Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, drunk driving. And in the process, she has saved millions of lives. She converted her daughter's life into something that ended up saving millions of lives. So those are to the extreme. It takes black belt level, also some other systems. I would urge you, if that trips you up, let's not take it to an extreme and say, you know what, I guarantee you 99% of your challenges fit in a category of, if you really put your mind to it, you can figure out how do you convert it into a gift.
Thank you. And just to give a real example of what you've just shared there, I think from within the chat, Sue, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, Sue, but she just said, we lost our youngest daughter and our family has strived to live the best possible life we can since. Not always possible, but definitely good from bad. So I think, even in the face of that kind of deep tragedy, there are opportunities to reframe and move forward and so on. So this is an anonymous question, this next one, and it links back to what you said about falling in love with ourselves. This question is just asked, what if your childhood wasn't too good? What happens if you're kind of, you have an unhappy memories of earlier in life? Is there another way of sort of finding the child within, where that may be linked to a sort of difficult or traumatic childhood?
Well, actually, it's particularly important to do this work in that situation. We have, I had a very horrible childhood. My father was pretty scary and violent, and I was in clinical depression the first 30 years of my life. And the picture that I saw, my only surviving picture of childhood, is a very depressed child. So initially, when I looked at him, I was going to, and one of my saboteurs is victim saboteur. Initially, every time I looked at the picture, I got filled with rage against my father and pity for this kid who had a horrible childhood. But that's really my saboteurs. That was my judge feeling the rage, and my victim feeling sorry for myself. And I kept doing this work until what I got to is one in which I saw the essence of this kid. This kid wasn't born as a depressed, terrified kid. He was born with gorgeous essence. And that essence was still in that picture. So I fell in love with that being. So when I look at that picture now, I feel nothing but absolute love for this kid, not sorry for him. My feeling sorry for him isn't going to do anything. My loving this kid is what kind of came true. And also the work there that I needed to do is the empathy towards my father, who was a very broken man. So shifting from just empathy towards myself to empathy towards my father, asking myself, what must have happened to him that took him from a beautiful boy he was born to be to the person he became, who was so terrifying to me. And as I made up stories about what must have happened to him, then I also was filled with compassion for this broken man rather than just rage for him. So is there healing work to be done? Absolutely. But the ultimate destination of, you know, finding your true essence that still shows up as a kid most clearly is one that's a pathway there.
I felt shivers down my spine hearing you say that. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story. I think that really brings it to life, that in many ways it makes this more important than ever in those situations, doesn't it? George has asked a really interesting question, and it links to something else I saw coming up in the chat. When you gave that point about responding to saboteurs by bringing your attention, for example, to that PQ rep of rubbing the fingers together rather than going down the thinking trail, some people were saying, how does that relate to things like CBT, where we actually try and explore our thoughts and our feelings to try and understand unhelpful patterns and move away from them? So George's question says, well, firstly, thanks so much for this amazing webinar. You said it's not helpful to focus on why you're thinking or feeling negatively and let your sort of sage figure it out. Does that mean that this idea of exploring thinking patterns which might be leading to anxious or depressive thoughts is not actually helpful? Because I think quite a lot of therapeutic techniques do encourage you to explore that, don't they?
Yeah, there is a, see, when you're looking at your saboteurs, you're in a thinking mode, you look at the patterns, you take notes. Yeah, these are the things I do. These are the behaviors are my saboteurs. So that there's a time and a place for the thinking, for sure. And then what I'm saying is if in the middle of the action, you are finding yourself go negative, the thing to do there is do PQ reps, shift to sage, be able to handle the challenge there, and know that your sage actually arrives at deeper wisdom about what's underneath these emotions and reactions that I have. And the weird thing is that the way to access that wisdom is through the no thinking mind, which is activated through PQ reps. So another way to put it, the rational mind makes you smart. The sage mind makes you wise. Wisdom is a much deeper thing than the thinking mind. And so I would love for you to develop that deeper wisdom. The way you get there is not by thinking.
Thanks for clarifying. A few people have been asking about some of the other saboteur tendencies that we didn't mention when you were looking at my blind spot. Someone, Fariba, has said, could you say a few words about restless, avoider, victim, and hypervigilant? Do you want to pick out any of those as ones that are worth exploring, or talking a bit more about what that means?
Yeah, let me talk about the hypervigilant, for example, because it's so prevalent right now. So every saboteur lies to you and says, I'm here to help you. And every saboteur creates the opposite of what it creates. So the hypervigilant has fooled you into thinking that by constantly being anxious about everything that could possibly go wrong, I am protecting you and your loved ones against all the dangers out there. The problem is you're so exhausted seeing tigers behind every tree, and that by the time the actual tiger emerges, you are not going to see it. You're not protecting yourself well. And so basically I go back to the Jedi in war. She is calm and clear-headed. And by being calm and clear-headed, she can be fierce and put all her mental, emotional energy on actually protecting herself. So the thing I want to say to the hypervigilance is, vigilance is awesome, but vigilance is best done through a calm, clear head. If you're feeling anxious, that is actually going to make you less vigilant. Hypervigilance is not having you be more protective, right? So that's an example of how it backfires. We can go into the others if you want, Mark. There's a bunch.
Well, no, that was really helpful.
Yeah.
I guess there's another point that's a word that I've seen a few times on the chat, and a question here from Nell, which has got another word that I'd love to explore. Which the question is, where does guilt fit into all of this? And I get a sense from the work that we do with people that quite a lot of people feel a sense of guilt about not being good enough, or about some of their saboteur tendencies, or indeed about the fact they don't do as much as they'd like to do to help others. How do we deal with guilt in this model?
Great. So let me generalize that question to what's the value of any of negative emotions, period, including guilt. And to answer that question, I ask a related question, which is pain good for you? And when you think about it, you'll say pain is good. Yeah, why? Because if you put your hand on a hot stove and you don't feel pain, you're going to keep your hand and burn to the bone. But here is the very important question. How long would you like to feel the pain? before you get the message and remove your hand from the hot stove? That's the big question. So is anger, shame, guilt, disappointment good for you? Absolutely. Why? Because if you're doing something terrible to somebody and you don't feel any guilt, you'll keep doing it. So please feel the guilt. But how long would I like you to feel guilt after you screw things up? For a second, as an alert, as a wake up. Then once you have woken up, then I would like for you to shift to the positive part of the brain that tries to figure out, how do I now deal with this situation in a way that makes up for what I did, in a way that turns this bad thing into a good thing? The part of your brain that figures out the best action is not the one that continues to feel your hand on the hot stove. Negative emotion for a second. Beyond that, your saboteurs are keeping your hand on the hot stove and complaining why life is so hard. So if you're feeling a negative emotion for more than a second, you're generating it. In particular, your saboteurs are generating it. All of your stress, in particular, like stress is awesome. Jedi in war, be stressed about being under attack. Awesome. But if you stay stressed, you get tunnel visioned and you can't protect yourself well. So that's the key thing about the guilt for sure.
I'm seeing requests both on the Q&A and in the chat for some more practical things we can do. This has been a fantastic combination of great theory and learning, but also things that we can do. So would you like to share with us either another of your great PQ reps to help deal with the saboteurs, or maybe one of these other power games that link to the sage characteristics? What feels most relevant to you?
Yeah, like I said, for each of the sage powers, we have multiple ways of getting you in touch with it. One is power game, but the other is power move. There's a physicality to powers that gets you close, gets you faster access to that part of your brain. For example, for the explore mode, if I am kind of sitting neutral, and I think that what's needed in this meeting is for me to get in touch with the explore mode, I move into the explore physicality, which for me is, and you may want to do it with me, which for me is, I lean forward, my eyes are wider open. There is an expectation, there's a fascination. It's like I'm a kid in the candy store that's just seeing, candies. So there's a physicality where for me, it's lean forward, open eye, open face. And when I do that physically, I begin to feel that emotionally, and I begin to access that within my mind, open that channel up. As opposed to now, let's do a physicality of a very different power, which is activate, which is fierce, fearless, laser-focused action. For me, what that physicality is, I feel my spine. I get straight in my spine. I feel my spine almost get connected to the floor, and I just feel my backbone. And the moment I do that, I feel more fearless. I feel more powerful. I feel more ready for laser focused action. And so you may want to, just experiment with which physicality puts you in touch with which of these modes, and use that as one of the ways to get in touch with that power.
Very good. This has been packed so much full of wonderful wisdom, Shirzad. I'm still seeing a few people asking for a bit more insights on saboteurs. So just to clarify for the audience again, tomorrow we'll send a follow-up email. There'll be a link to the video from this session so you can watch it again, you can share it with others. And we'll also send a link where you can do your own saboteur assessment and find out a bit more about some of this. The one that I've seen mentioned a few times is the victim saboteur. That feels like it's something that's on quite a few people's minds. Could you say a little bit more about that, Shirzad?
Yeah, victim, like every other saboteur, creates the opposite of what it pretends that it wants to create. So the victim typically has the strength there is a real sense of wanting to be special and different and unique, which is an awesome thing. Being special, unique, and different is a very awesome thing. And also a real need for love, for connection and love. And the problem with the victim is that it tries to be unique and generate love in a very negative way. So you end up thinking that you are uniquely disadvantaged, that people are uniquely mistreating you, the world is uniquely doing bad things to you. And instead of getting love, you get pity, not just from others, but you also get pity from yourself. So I was a victim was one of my strongest saboteur. And what I found is that in an attempt to get love, in the vacuum of love, I had started giving myself soothing, self-soothing, by feeling pity and generating pity. And it took me quite a long time to realize pity is very different from love. And I was cutting myself short from that and shifted from that.
So one of the feelings that's very much in this Action for Happiness community is a desire to be a force for good, to try and create some ripples of change in the world around us. We all recognize that we're flawed human beings trying to do the best we can with our inner saboteurs and our good intentions and our failings and all the rest of it. But there's a very strong sense of compassion within this community to try and help others. How would you recommend we use some of these sort of saboteur and sage ideas in the way that we bring ourselves into the world if we want to be a force for good in our families, our communities, our workplaces? How can we bring this to life?
Yeah, be the change you want to be in the world. I pride myself in not teaching anything that I don't practice daily, and so we don't want to be hypocrites. If you want others, and if you want the world to shift more towards the light and away from the dark, I would love for you every single day to ask yourself, how do I shift more towards your own light and away from your own darkness? And know that this is mental fitness, meaning that is not going to be accomplished by you reading a book or doing another workshop. All of those generate insights. Insight is 20% of the game. The change really occurs in building muscles. And so everything that I just talked about is replicatable and repeatable practice, 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 practice. So I'd love for you to have a sense of what would it be like if you go to the gym. Our research shows you need about 15 minutes a day of practice. For a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks, which is why we have built programs that are 6 to 8 weeks long to be able to build enough neural pathways for the sage response so that you counteract years and years of neural pathways, the muscles of saboteur response. So I would say start with yourself, and also don't lie to yourself. Know that sustained change is about building those muscles through habit formation rather than keep reading books and keep getting new insights, which is an awesome 20% start, but it all fizzles unless it gets connected with that 80% of the game, which is building up the muscles.
It's the action in Action for Happiness that counts, not the thinking so much. Yeah, Shirzad, thank you so much. You've shared so much. There's been such a great response from the community. Very grateful to everyone who's been here for this event. 3,500 people have joined us live. So many great comments, thoughtful things shared, and lovely questions. But above all, Shirzad, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for giving your time and sharing your wisdom. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolute pleasure, Mark. Thank you for being the very thoughtful, interviewer that you've been. It has been a pleasure for me.
Thanks so much. See you again. Keep up the great work.